College football nerds here talking week 12 recap. There was a couple of interesting games that we want to discuss. We're going to get into maybe some schedule discussion, some look ahead to the playoffs discussion. So just lock in, enjoy a ride, get a cup of coffee, and let's go. All right, Josh, this shocker, I guess, Alabama and Oklahoma. Not too much of a shocker if you've watched Alabama play this year. They've been flirting a little bit with disaster, and they're at the end of an absolute brutal stretch in their schedule. Not a huge surprise. I feel like they've earned some grace in terms of thinking about playoffs and things like that. But the loss, if you're an Alabama fan, is pretty frustrating. And I'm going to upset some Oklahoma fans here. Hopefully they'll stick with me. We both picked this a one-score game for Alabama, but I actually thought it would be a little more comfortable getting to that one score. Josh, this game felt like, we were talking about beforehand a little bit, felt a lot like the Auburn and Texas A&M game. And like you said, except in this case, Auburn didn't score any points. Alabama really did outplay Oklahoma in this game. And Oklahoma forced the turnovers, and that is part of it. Fumble recoveries are random. We saw that, even on the first fumble that Alabama didn't recover. They totally earned the pick six. Like, that was a really smart blitz, really well executed. But in general, in terms of executing an offense driving down the field and having a defense stop that offensive execution driving down the field, Alabama outplayed Oklahoma in both of those aspects. They lost the special teams game, which is part of it. And Josh, other than just the maddening takeaway from this that Alabama is going to play close, whether you're an elite team or a crappy team, I don't know how much you can take away from this game.
Well, I mean, I think you can take away the fact that Alabama lost, and that's the biggest thing to take away. I mean, I did the preview video, and the thing I noted in that was, if you're Alabama, you want to play the patient game. You want to do what Texas did. Texas was not very successful per play in that game, but they were patient. They took what was available to them. They were okay punting if it wasn't. They made Oklahoma have the impetus to have to drive the field. They let Oklahoma make mistakes. In a large way, Daniel, I would almost say that this game was kind of the opposite of the Oklahoma-Texas game. Oklahoma made 3 costly turnovers that gave Texas some short fields, some points opportunities to score points that dug a hole that Oklahoma couldn't dig out of. I think the difference, and you're kind of almost baited me into saying this, but I have to admit it. I think the difference is that when playing up to their capability, which is a big, big, big win, and if Alabama's a better team than Oklahoma. And you saw that at times. Alabama took the lead because when they're executing properly, particularly on offense, which I think even Oklahoma fans would admit, Alabama has a lot more talent. They have more capability. Oklahoma, where I will sort of fight you, Daniel, as you talk about outplaying them, Oklahoma outplayed Alabama because the big negatives, the ability to punch the ball out, to be physical, to blitz, to not turn the ball over, those are the things that are playing to win the game. And, in a large extent, I would say Alabama was probably the better team that got outplayed, but that's not an unusual thing in the game of football. And at some level, Daniel, when you're getting outplayed consistently, that is who you are. And there's 2 things I'm going to note. First, I think you got to give a lot of credit to special teams. It's something that has been sort of under the surface with these football teams for a while. Like right now I have up SP Plus because I know in SP Plus, Alabama special teams is currently ranked 96th. Oklahoma's ranked 18th. Special teams are not worth a whole lot. Like there's a point system in SP Plus which goes straight to rating. Alabama's offense is worth 35 points, and then Alabama's defense subtracts 15 points. The defensive rating, it's all effectively negative. So 15 points, perfect score 0. Their special teams is negative 0.3. Oklahoma's is 0.5. Like 0.8 points is the entire value of special teams. It's not actually that significant, but when it is significant, it's significant. And I'll say, I got my my shorts, or as they like to call them, swagger pants on, for this game here. Because you gotta give some loves to the kicker, and our Bird Dogs, our old sponsor here. But they executed when they needed to. They made field goals when they needed to. That's a part of the game. They turned the ball over. In the other side, and I'll let you talk on this a little bit, but I'll call out, like we've talked about Ty Simpson early in the season. You talked about he was kind of I think in your view he was a surefire first round draft pick, and I pushed back on that. And the reason was I had seen too much inconsistency with him. In the Wisconsin game, even in the Georgia game, Vanderbilt game, he played an extremely high level. 13 yards per attempt against Wisconsin, though they've gotten lit up in the year a few times now. 11 versus Vanderbilt. Again, Vanderbilt's gotten lit up. Lit up. That's probably a point of discussion for some other teams. But the Georgia game, 276 passing, 7.3 per. It was a good game. Had some drops and some other things that affected him, but statistically not dominant. In many ways, the Oklahoma game, he had more yardage, higher yard per attempt in this game than he had against Georgia. The thing I'll flag, though, Daniel, going back now to the South Carolina game, that is 3 games in a row where he has been consistently inaccurate in the intermediate and deep passing game. In some degree, even the short passing game. And at some point, Daniel, I think you have to say Ty Simpson is who he is. I think he has a very good understanding of the offense. He makes a lot of checks at the line. It bit him against an Oklahoma team, probably with a huge benefit off the bye, where they did a lot of stuff to confuse him. They would show man or show zone, knew that he was cerebral when checked, and they would actually have a disguised opposite. They ended up checking into a lot of zone beaters against man and vice versa. The blitz you mentioned, it's an interesting play because they motion into man and they snap the ball while the guy's in motion. And Oklahoma had a called blitz where the guy is following the receiver, and since they snap with the receiver at the line of scrimmage, the defender following the motion man actually is the blitzer that comes free up the middle, rolls off, and they check coverage. That's the kind of thing you can do off a bye week, and it's the thing that confuses a quarterback. But I will say, that part of the game he's really good at. The actual throwing mechanics, consistency, accuracy part, I don't know that he's that good. At this point, I think you have to question whether that is, again, just kind of who he is. He hasn't been 75% passing, Daniel, since the Wisconsin game in a single game. And I know the competition's been very good, but I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on it. I mean, do you agree with me that I think Simpson is a good quarterback with a very good understanding of the offense, but maybe it's time to consider whether he's just not a consistently accurate passer downfield?
I think the D-ball is a problem. At this point, you can't say that it's not. The first round draft pick thing, I think, still holds. The reason I said it was a combination of I think Ty Simpson is better than who maybe a lot of people thought he was coming into the season, but also it's a really bad draft class. I mean, Ty Simpson isn't out here winning games on his own with no running game against elite defenses by himself, but I don't know that, like, Mendoza had his Heisman moment against a bad Penn State deep pass defense. It's bad. Like, just watch some of the other games they played this year. Or, Dante Moore has struggled consistently against good pass defenses this year, and they're not playing near the caliber schedule that Alabama's playing. And I think that speaks to possibly where we are right now in terms of our perception of Alabama's offense or who Alabama is versus maybe an Ohio State or an Indiana, in that Indiana gets to kind of give all their focus to a Penn State because that's kind of their big game this year. Penn State and Oregon, that's it. Ohio State's big game this year after the Texas game is a Michigan team who just lost to Northwestern. Alabama has played, almost lost. Didn't I say almost? If I didn't say almost, I'm sorry. Almost lost to Northwestern. Northwestern had them in a blender that whole game, right? I mean, so I say all this to say I don't think people understand how hard Alabama's schedule is. And it's not even the hardest in the SEC by a pretty wide margin. South Carolina is way harder. How hard this is and how it has a compounding effect when you don't have any weeks off to quote-unquote look good or get right. It kind of jaundices your view of a certain player or how good they are or a certain team. I have a feeling that some of what Alabama is kind of baked in, and it's why they may not, make a deep run in the playoffs. But also some of who Alabama is, we're seeing them at the end of a brutal stretch where they didn't have a game against a Rutgers or half the teams in the Big 12. Every week has been someone who could win 10, 11 games in the ACC or the Big 12. Every single one of them, except for South Carolina, but they have a defense that's good enough to do that. So I don't know what to think about Alabama. I think that if you're the kind of team that slow plays every second half, I think they have 6 legitimate touchdowns in the second half in 7 SEC games, 6 or 7. That's pitiful. And part of it is because they have a slow play offense that tries to hold the ball, play ridiculous ball control. And I'm going to close this out, Josh, because I know we got to get to other games. I think one of the dumbest things I've ever seen, and it's a trend this year where coaches are obsessed with not giving the ball back to the other team. That cost Alabama the game here. They had the ball with 7 minutes left on their final possession, and they intentionally slow played it. They took 5 minutes to get to midfield, intentionally ran the clock out because they were setting up for the final kick. The guy who is a shaky kicker. That was a terrible idea because their defense was holding Oklahoma all day. So if you don't give yourself 2 chances and put it on your defense to hold them once and get you the ball back, I thought that was one of the dumbest things that I've seen in a while, and I've seen a lot of dumb things out of this Alabama coaching staff.
I mean, when you look at it, they had some successful runs. Maybe they thought they would break runs, but I'll close out this point with just noting Alabama clearly has an issue with running back. Jam Miller was supposed to be their starting running back. I don't know what his deal is because I thought he played better in recent years. There was zero burst. Daniel, when he came in late in that game and he played a few snaps and had a couple runs, they set up some stuff that was blocked well, set up well. There's a hole in a seam, and a lot of backs in this conference would have gotten a 30 or 40-yard play out of that. And Alabama's running backs couldn't do it. And then you saw Daniel Hill, who's been a lot more effective for them. And I will say, they found a run game. And, if you're an Alabama fan, the biggest thing I will say is they needed some semblance of a consistent run game to make a run. And they got 4 yards a carry out of Daniel Hill in this game. They have a viable run game, I think, now. But Hill has no breakaway speed. The advantage he brings is he's the only back I've really seen for them that hits a hole and there's a guy in the hole and he can drag the guy for 2 or 3 yards. Nobody on their team is going to make somebody miss, but he can at least take 2 yards of contact, turn it into 4 or 5. It's a thing, again, I noted in the preview, right? Their line yardage is actually the same as Ole Miss. It's about the same as Oklahoma. They have the same point of contact on the field. Their backs just don't generate anything extra. They did in this game, but at the end, running the ball, as you said, it felt like the whole second half they were trying to take air out of the ball, but they don't have a back that can capitalize on it. And at some level, it almost just feels like it's a mistake for them to run as much as they do. Yeah, like transition to the next game. I mean, my preference, I definitely want to talk about Georgia, Texas, but I'll let you drive the train, Daniel, where you want to go.
I've got an interesting note about Georgia, so let's talk about it. So we predict this game. Texas fans got upset with us. This is a thing that we've been consistent with for years. Is when there is absolutely a lot of improvement for a lot of teams from week 1 to week 12. And I believe that Texas has shown some of that this year. However, something that you've always harped on and I've always agreed with is when you are a fan who thinks your team has gotten it all figured out, you need to look at your schedule and make sure you're figuring it out didn't coincide with a dip in your schedule. And for me, Texas faced what we now have evidence to show a Vanderbilt team that has a great offense that's hard to prepare for, kind of like playing a triple option team, even though it's not triple option team, y'all. The defense, if you can throw it, if you're a mildly capable passing offense, you can wreck Vanderbilt. And then overtime with Mississippi State, where they had to score, I think, 24 points in the fourth quarter to send it to overtime, and then a 16-13 overtime win against Kentucky. That was the summation of their getting right, and we were skeptical of that, and I think we were fair to be skeptical of that. Josh, I'm not doing the transitive property thing here, but I do want to highlight this and have you chew on it for a second. Georgia's played 10 games this year. In a schedule that includes Marshall and Austin Peay, this is their second biggest margin win of the season. That also includes Kentucky. That includes Auburn, Florida, Mississippi State. Josh, what does that say, if anything, about Texas?
This is where I'll push back a little bit. One of the problems that happens in football scoring and considering margin of victory is that the more the opposing team is really trying to win the game, the more the margin of victory it likely spreads apart or gets bigger at the end of the game. I mean, Georgia scored 21 points in the fourth quarter, and if you look at how they, how they scored that, it has a lot to do with, being in a situation where, Texas is trying to win. I mean, they're straining. It's 14-10 going into the fourth. Georgia has a long drive, 10-play, 73-yard drive. Then Georgia has the onside kick because it's a big game. They need to win the game. They go down, they score again. Now all of a sudden you've gone from 10-14 to 10-28. Texas gets the ball. They go shotgun, no huddle, 3 straight passes, really trying to push it down the field, get nothing out of it. -4 yards on the drive. Georgia gets the ball at the Texas 33-yard line and scores again to make it 35-10. And so my point is, when you're in these situations, Georgia is trying to bury Texas even with the lead. Texas is trying to score late in the game, even down significantly. It does make for large deficits. But I will say, Daniel, I think the other side of it is Texas's offense, I don't know, has improved as much as Texas fans wanted to think it did. I mean, to your point, and this was what we flagged in the preview, and as you said, people kind of took offense to it, but my point was, you were 16-13 with Kentucky just 3 weeks ago before this Georgia game. And then it was Mississippi State and then Vanderbilt, and yeah, you scored a lot of points. Those are 2 of the 3 worst defenses in the conference with Arkansas. And so it was hard for me to believe this was a huge turnaround. I mean, even the Oklahoma game, 23-6. 1, 23 is not a lot of points. 2, Texas didn't move the ball very well against Oklahoma. They had 302 total yards. It was Oklahoma turnovers that set them up, again, almost the opposite of that Alabama-Oklahoma game. And so there's a lot of not shocking there. And then another part of the not shocking that I think for years, Daniel, this just flies under the radar. Georgia is incredibly efficient offensively in points per drive. I mean, they're the 6th best team in the country in points per drive at 3.47. To be clear, Ohio State is 5th at 3.52. Georgia scores almost exactly the same points per possession that Ohio State does. They just play at a slower tempo. But that means when you speed the game up, they can actually put a lot of points on because their offense has actually been extremely efficient. And when you talk medium depth drives, that's drives from roughly middle starting position, so basically between the 30s. Georgia leads the country 3.76 points per drive. That's first in the country. So when you're in this kind of tight game, they just score in a pretty incredible clip. Texas, by the way, 54th, 2.4 points per drive. Not anywhere near the same planet. So if you thought this game was going to be super close, it was either one that you thought Georgia would play down or up to competition, struggle, which they have a couple times. 2, Georgia's secondary has been an issue. Georgia, as we kind of flagged in the preview, has gotten healthier there. DeMello Jones, I'll fully admit we fumbled some names because there's way too many KJ names and whatnot. But he was the guy I was trying to flag as the corner that's kind of come on for them. That has solved the issues they've had opposite Dalen Everett, and he was finally healthy and able to go. That really shores up their secondary, and all of a sudden they're a very different team. And so I wasn't shocked that they blew out Texas. I think this is kind of who Texas is. I think this is kind of who Georgia is. I don't think the gap is really 25. That's the nature of a game where, you're down 14-10 in the fourth quarter, and now all of a sudden you're down 21-10, and you've got to start pressing, and, Georgia caught an extra possession with the onside kick. That's just good coaching. The notable things to me is Arch Manning at 5.8 yards per attempt is probably who he is. And Daniel, I also will go one step further and to say that having figured out the corner problems, Georgia is now a much more dangerous team. Georgia with a good corner on both sides of the field probably beats Alabama and probably beats Tennessee comfortably. This Georgia team is not sexy, so they're not getting a lot of attention. Gunnar Stockton, 24-29 against a very good defense, throws 4 touchdowns. They have weapons. Humphreys has come on to complement Branch, who I don't think really you want to be a number 1 receiver, but he's an excellent gadget guy. Noah Thomas has come on, and then you've got a phenomenal set of, Bell, Delp, Lucky, the tight ends are great, with good backs. This is a complete Georgia team. And Daniel, I really think if you could just look at them as they are today, I know Ohio State is in the sweet spot. But this Georgia team, to me, right now, is probably the second best team playing college football. Better, in my view, than Indiana, and they are by far, to me, the dark horse to win the national championship right now.
Alabama fans were all up over me in the comments a couple of weeks ago in my top 10 when I said that I felt like Georgia had figured out some things on defense and Alabama's offense had been figured out. And until they find a run game and or a deep ball, I think Georgia's the better team. And they got all over me. I think that,
as we said, there's a power rankings versus ratings. I still think you had to rate Alabama ahead of Georgia, but I think your point has been, if they played that day and they had the same record, you would pick Georgia over Alabama.
Our top 10 has never been like a straight, in my opinion, never been a straight rankings. I think Georgia's playing good football. I still think they can get beaten. They haven't played great pass offenses or great offenses in general since Ole Miss, where they gave up 35. So we forget that pretty quickly. It's the same thing I said about Texas. You got to make sure that getting good doesn't coincide with a dip in the schedule. They did take a knee on the one, but they struggled for 3.5 quarters with Florida. My concern, and that's why I opened this preamble about where Georgia has been this year and how they smoked Texas is, yes, Georgia got an extra possession on the onside kick, but there were several possessions after they scored the 2 touchdowns that Texas didn't do. Texas was stopping Georgia's offense and not doing anything with their own offense. And I think right now, Texas is just a bad offensive team. They ran it for like 1.4 yards per carry against Georgia. They ran it, I think, worse than Alabama ran it, and Alabama can't run this year. So I think there are real concerns there, and not to get bogged down too much because we need to go to the next one, although there weren't that many games to talk about this week. I think Texas is in a bit of a danger zone here with Arch in that I'm just going to lay it out there. In my opinion, I think Arch is just a guy. He's not great. He's maybe good minus, mid plus. And the problem is Texas has enough talent around him to go 9-3 every year. And that is the worst place to be as a program that has national championship expectations, because if you have a limiter at quarterback, it's super tough to bench them when they're going 9-3. It's just like it's hard to fire a coach when they're going 9-3. You can still do it, but it's tough. But I think in this offseason, there needs to be some real soul searching on whether or not Arch Manning is the guy to get them to a national championship, because if not, then you're treading water until he leaves. And that's just a tough place to be. I think they were there a little bit with Quinn Ewers. Texas fans, a lot of it sucks for them because they've had 2 of these back to back. But I think that's kind of where they're at. They need to figure that out.
I made the whole comment on Ty Simpson earlier. I mean, I think he's a very good quarterback. Let me be clear. He's a very good quarterback. He's a high-level Power 4 starter. He's not a Heisman caliber quarterback, in my view. Like, he's got flaws mechanically as a passer and whatnot. I think he's just kind of maybe, I won't even say he has a ceiling because I think he can play at a higher level. But he doesn't have the consistency, wow factor release, all that. And I will say a big part of it is composure. I felt like he's kind of lost his composure a number of times throughout the year, and he really didn't have it against Oklahoma. But, I say that to lead into, Arch Manning. As much as I might criticize Simpson, he's still, I think, mechanically, consistency, composure-wise, a little bit ahead of Arch. And it's easy, I think, too, to forget. I mean, Manning's not that young. What is he, a year? I think he's a year older than Simpson, maybe same year.
I think they're the same class.
Yeah,
I think.
And bear in mind, Simpson was himself a 5-star, but when he was a recruit, you can look up the receipts. Whatever 4 or 5 years ago, we tweeted out, "Hey, we don't understand the hype of him being the number 1 player in the country," and then we followed a reply and noted, "But I think he's a top 50 player." And I think maybe even that was a little generous. He's been worse than we expected. But he is still, I think, a 4-star, 100th best player in the country, number 8, number 9 quarterback recruit in a class is about what he should be. as you said, that's almost just a guy by Texas standards. And it is a lot like what Ewers ended up being. Ewers was a bad eval on the recruiting side. We've said this a million times because he came out during COVID. Those guys were misevaluated. Aller is another one on a pretty consistent basis. He was a low-round NFL talent. That is what I think Arch Manning is. He has some good traits. He mechanically has improved a lot. I think he stepped into his throws. He's being more patient. There was a point I flagged where he had reverted a little bit to the quick sidearm without stepping into the throw, just kind of really trying to quickly get it out. He's not good enough to do that. And it's a little bit, Daniel, we've talked about this a lot with Raiola. There's a lot of these quarterbacks that are trying to do things they physically can't do, and this sidearm quick release thing is really in vogue. Julian Sayin does it too. Julian Sayin has been able to do it consistently, and it's the thing that bothers me with Sayin because I don't know what he's going to look like when he's pressured. Not just pressured in terms of getting a guy in his face, but when his timing is sped up and he can't set his feet. But he seems to indicate he can do it consistently in a way these other guys can't. Everybody's trying to be Patrick Mahomes. Nobody's Patrick Mahomes. And mechanically, it feels like, if Manning were to just try to use slightly more traditional mechanics, he could be a pretty effective quarterback. But the more he tries to game it, sidearm it, he's not that guy. He's tall, he's athletic, he's got a good arm, he has a good understanding of the game. He can be a quality, 4-star, low NFL draft pick quarterback for you. But I don't know that he's a lot more than that. But I will say to your point, Daniel, you talk about the NFL draft. That's, I think, about the best we have this year. I mean, you can consider whether Sayin is unique in his arm release and accuracy, which I've kind of argued he is. I just wonder if there are other components that we're missing, which I think they've shown they can do, though I will say it was a bit of a mixed bag against UCLA, actually. You ignore the stat sheet. There were a lot of DPIs. He still ended up looking pretty good. Other than him, who is at least elite in a number of categories, I don't know that anybody else is more than a guy. And if you're Texas, as you said, just like the situations Alabama's in a little bit, he can win you games with the talent around you. Ty Simpson is winning games with the talent around him, has won a couple games kind of for him, but then there are other games where in their clutch moments and he can't make it happen. And is that good enough, or are you going to want another quarterback in the same way where I really wonder, Alabama has that Keelan kid who's supposed to be an absolute phenom. Like, if Simpson were to come back, at what point does Keelan push him? And I do think it's going to cause some of these guys, I think Simpson will enter the draft personally just because of the draft class and being pushed, and we'll see where it ends up. But if Manning doesn't enter the draft, yeah, I think with a lot of these quarterbacks, you may end up in a situation like Nussmeier was at LSU, where you've got a really highly talented quarterback and you find he has the same ceiling he's had in every prior year, and it's just not going to be enough to get you to where you want to be.
Yeah, I think this year's draft class, if you're Simpson, you got to go because next year's better. And even if I'm not sure Mendoza is the best quarterback in college football. I don't think that. I think he hasn't been tested. And if you look at the games where he's faced good defenses, he hasn't lit it up. He just hasn't. I mean, 20 points against Iowa, which is not like Maeva had a better game yesterday against Iowa. Moore, I am not sold on Moore at all. Again, if you look at when he's played good defenses, it's far below what Ty Simpson has done against good defenses. So I would be shocked if more than he's going to be at worst the third quarterback off the board. You got to go because that's NFL first round money. You take it. It's a lot worse if you come back and don't. How much are you going to improve? Like, you have to think you're going to be number one overall to do that. So I think Ty Simpson's gone. I think Arch has got to come back. The problem is if he comes back, it's what we discussed. And he's got 3 years in the system. I just don't know that he's going to do it. And I think Texas fairly has national championship aspirations, which means you have to make hard decisions. James Franklin never made the hard decision on quarterback, and that's why he's unemployed. Never made it. And like Prbula at Missouri was sitting there behind Aller, and he's a better quarterback in my opinion. All right, Josh, this USC-Iowa game was interesting because I thought this is a game that Iowa might actually win. It was not a great matchup for USC in terms of, how Iowa likes to play, how USC likes to play. Iowa really struggled early in this game. Actually, ended up putting up a pretty decent game. And to me, I be honest, like USC is better this year than I expected. I think this is a good win. I was not going to be ranked after this loss. I haven't seen the top 25 yet today, but I think Iowa is a pretty good football team, and USC has largely avoided, other than what you rightly say, the Illinois game, largely avoided really stepping on the rake this year. And I think that they're actually a pretty good win for Notre Dame if we're teasing out playoff sort of acceptance in situations.
I mean, this was an interesting game. It was in pouring rain, which favors Iowa because Iowa doesn't have much of a passing game, and that helps negate some of the team speed for USC. USC is probably the most sneakily good team out there, or at least the team that is probably getting the least amount of benefit for how good they are. They're sitting right now with only 2 losses. They have Oregon and UCLA to go. I don't know who all nationally is even talking about the reality that USC could really beat Oregon and UCLA to end the year, and be sitting there at 10-2. And then what do you do with them? Especially if they beat Oregon, who's currently a top 10 team. We're always going to tick somebody off, so I'll just say it. Both of us, I think, Daniel, would you agree, are in the camp that we don't buy Oregon? Do you agree?
I don't buy them.
I
don't buy them as a national championship team.
There's just too many red flags to me. When you, as we said, USC has largely avoided stepping on the rake, but I think they did step on a rake against Illinois. And if you want to break down the way the Big Ten looks and the Big Ten standings, there are kind of tiers within that conference. Illinois is the team in FPI and everything else that is like a 40s to 50s rated team in most rating systems. It depends where. I mean, you look at certain ones and they're in the 20s. It's kind of a weird case study. I think FPI, they're like 27th. In our model, though, they're like 50th. Illinois is a team that I think should not have beaten USC. But they were a physical team. Lincoln Riley teams sometimes just don't show up and want to get punched in the mouth. They did not play that game defensively or offensively. They got beat. If you throw that out, then you start to realize when you look at teams like Iowa and especially like Oregon 30-20 lost to Indiana, 30-24 over Penn State, 18-16 win over Iowa. Like, they all seem to be in the same tier. Penn State, Indiana, Iowa. Illinois is the big win for Indiana because they were ranked, which is in part because they beat USC. I just don't think they probably should have beaten USC. And then when you throw that out, all of a sudden, Indiana, 30-20 win over Oregon, 27-24 over Penn State. That all lines up too. The one exception to this whole sort of bubble may be USC. I mean, 26-21 over Iowa. That's consistent with everything Indiana and Oregon are doing, Daniel. And that was in the pouring rain, which didn't really benefit them. 31-13 over Michigan is a highly impressive win. The knock is 34-24 to Notre Dame. And I mean, that was a game that was 34-27 in the start of the fourth quarter. Notre Dame had a chance to win. USC had a chance to win that game. They threw for 328. They held Notre Dame to 136 yards passing. They got run on, especially in the second half, and kind of got taken away from them. I think Notre Dame's a very, very good team. USC, Daniel, might really be a playoff caliber team, just sitting back there quietly, one loss out of conference. And if they run the gauntlet, the standing situation is really complicated, just like the SEC. You've got way too many one loss and 0 loss teams. And, I don't know that Indiana or Ohio State are going to lose again, so they're probably going to be in the conference title. But USC has a very good chance to beat Oregon and then probably have a very, very good argument to be in the playoff, even though they're sitting back there pretty deep in the rankings right now. And I will just say in this game, I mean, Iowa has played well. 7.9 per isn't that awe-inspiring, but this Iowa defense has been good all year. And, I think defensively, as you said, they've been playing better and better football. But, yeah, I mean, 7.9 per is the most that Iowa had given up passing outside of or since the Indiana game in September. They gave up 5.3 to Oregon. I think this USC team is just legit. I think this was a gutsy win for them in a difficult game. Yeah, bounce of the ball was big here, just like it helped blow the game open for Missouri. Kind of weird that happened twice in 1 week. But yeah, I mean, USC is a really just sneakily good team with, according to a lot of metrics, the best offense in the country.
All right, and we'll get into. We're going to do a preview of that game, so we don't have to do too much on that here. But I did think it was worth noting. I don't think USC is getting enough credit. I actually, because I like Iowa this year, I think that they deserve credit for that game. I actually thought USC might lose it. All right, so the other one that's interesting is this Texas A&M South Carolina game, and this speaks to. I think you saw. So much, this game was a microcosm of so many things that we've been saying this year. So, South Carolina is going to end up like 4-8 this year or something. And people will see that and say, gosh, what a crappy team. If you played them close, then you suck. And it's not the same. And same thing with Penn State, by the way. Penn State got their first Power 4 win this weekend. Their record is going to be terrible, but the sum total of their parts is much better than a 4-8 team like I can't think of one off the top of my head, but like a UCF or something like that. They're night and day different. And so, but post expansion, with the way schedules line up, it's really tough for people to properly contextualize what 4-8 means, what 6-6 means. I just want to run through this real quickly for people who don't know. This is South Carolina's schedule since their kind of tune-up game against South Carolina State. Vanderbilt, Missouri, Kentucky, LSU, Oklahoma, Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. And they close the season with Clemson. That is so brutal, and they've had a lot of close games in that. And so I wasn't shocked when South Carolina gave A&M a game. Now, a lot of this was A&M being silly and not really, playing up to their standard in the first half. But South Carolina's not a bunch of bums. That's a team with 3 or 4 first-round draft picks on it. And so that wasn't surprising. What was surprising to me, Josh, is how bad the collapse was in the second half. They had to perfectly collapse equally, entirely on both sides of the ball to lose that game by 1 point.
SEC teams going into that game with a 27-point lead at half, Daniel, were 284 and nothing. Never, ever, ever had an SEC team lost with a 27-point lead at halftime in conference play. There are a few parts of it. I mean, one, when we've talked about A&M, and to the credit, we've got some really loyal A&M fans, and they've generally agreed with this. We kept saying that A&M was going to drop a random game because their offense is a random number generator. 16-10 game against Auburn, they outgained Auburn like 2-3 to 1. I mean, like per play, destroyed them, and they won by 6 and could have easily lost. They are so boomer bust, error prone, magic happening. Concepcion, Craver. I mean, their offense is just filled with explosive players. I mean, running the ball, Owens is phenomenal. Marcel Reed as an athlete and as a passer is phenomenal. But Reed will also make baffling decisions, really errant throws. And I think just as an offense, Daniel, they have a ton of explosivity, but there's not a lot in that offensive just depth chart that really builds consistency. Like there's not big possession targets. The offense really isn't designed for it. Marcel Reed is not really great at that style of football. He wants to create every play, and everything's going to go really well or really poorly. And you saw that to the most extreme way possible in this game, where the first half they could do absolutely nothing right, and the second half it was like they could do nothing wrong, where South Carolina just completely collapsed. I always say there's a lot of you've got to be willing to admit it's half emotional, and I think you also have to admit there's like half physical reality side to it. South Carolina got up, I think felt like they were starting to fall off, and then their star players Brian Thomas Jr., Dylan Stewart early in the game were making a big difference. Okoronkwo, the Alabama transfer, is a really good athlete and made a lot of plays for them. As the game went on, Daniel, I think those guys started to get tired. Nick Harbor gets banged up. He was the guy that helped at what you thought was going to break it open in a way that A&M couldn't possibly close it with his deep touchdown pass, and then seems to pull a hammy or something at halftime, right? Like the difference in South Carolina when they've had those guys all healthy going in 100% and they're not is can play with anybody to trash. And when you talk about South Carolina and you say, oh, well, they lost to this team that badly, like Vanderbilt destroyed them. The Oklahoma destroyed them. Oklahoma, they had 3 linemen banged up. They didn't. I think it was Dylan Stewart was out, maybe part of that game. Vanderbilt, they lost Lenora Sellers. Defensively held on for a while, but eventually got worn down. They need their stars being stars, or they're awful. And the first half, the stars were stars. The pass rush was ferocious, was causing A&M to make mistakes and suffocating them. And the big thing to me, Daniel, in the second half is that South Carolina's pass rush disappeared. And Texas A&M was able to execute the offense at their own timing. And this speaks to a lot of stuff. To your point, I mean, Texas A&M had played 7 of the bottom 8 in the SEC. South Carolina played 5 of the top 7. And I think you saw a little bit that South Carolina was not afraid to play A&M and came out guns firing. And A&M was like they weren't prepared for South Carolina, and also maybe a little bit of shell-shocked at how good South Carolina was. And again, reminder, that brutal schedule, they have dropped 7 of their last 8 games. Every one of those teams was ranked at one point. And the one they won was Kentucky. They won 35-13. Lost by a touchdown to Alabama, lost by 10 to LSU. There's a lot of indication South Carolina is actually decently good. I don't think they're very good, but they're decently good and by relative to those teams. And yeah, I mean, I think you can see why A&M is a team that should be pretty much a lock to the playoff at this point, may win the SEC title. You can also see why they're a team that could easily get bounced in the first round, lose the SEC championship badly. I don't think we know what they are. And I don't know if this was just running into a wall for the first time. And I mean, they've played some tough competition, mind you, right? Like Notre Dame is very good. That game was 41-40. That gave up a ton of points. Florida, they played good defenses, at least. Florida, LSU, Missouri. Missouri, they had a huge benefit with an injured quarterback. That's kind of been a bit of a theme for them. But Daniel, I'll end with this game. This is highlighting, and as you noted in a tweet, a lot of what we said about a lot of teams and like Big Ten teams this year. I don't have any doubt that Ohio State may be the best team in the country. I think Ohio State probably is the best team in the country. I have doubt on whether Indiana is the second best team in the country. I really do, frankly, just because of their schedule and who they played close relative to how good they were. They were kind of the good games they played, other than Illinois, which I don't buy. So the concern is just like A&M getting shell-shocked versus South Carolina, I think there's a lot to be said for being in Ohio State that doesn't get battle-tested, and then you're going to go into the playoff and play SEC teams that have been playing like 5 or 6 high-level teams through the year, have learned how to battle. They've also learned where a lot of their weak points are. They've fixed things. They've corrected things. Learned how to tune their offense and defense to deal with scaling issues or problems that didn't get shown on tape or didn't show up in practice until they played a high-level opponent. And I have long said the problem with the Big Ten for years in the BCS and playoff era losing to the SEC is that Ohio State or whoever came out of the Big Ten tended to have a much weaker schedule. And I think there were a lot of times where a better Ohio State team would lose to somebody like Clemson because they hadn't been properly challenged enough and they got punched and they made too many mistakes and they didn't know what to rely on in that game when the other team did. And I wonder a little bit if that's not what happened to A&M here, even though they were able to claw back and win. And it just reinforces the concern I have that an Ohio State team that I think probably is the best overall team in the country does not have the schedule they had last year where they played several hard games. And there's a reason they lost 2 games and we felt like should have been the 5 seed pretty adamantly last year. They don't have that schedule. And what may be a better Ohio State team may really struggle to do the thing they did last year and amp up. And instead, you may end up in the playoffs, play your worst game at the worst possible time because it's the first time you're strained and you drop it.
Yeah. I mean, to that point, South Carolina has played 7 of the top 10 teams in the SEC, 5 of the top 7. Texas A&M has played 7 of the bottom 8. And so my tweet was that we harp on this for Big Ten teams a lot, and Big Ten teams get frustrated. I'm also harping on it. Texas last year had an artificially easy or an unusually easy path to the playoffs where they missed a lot of teams and lost to the only ranked SEC team they played, lost to them twice. Texas A&M has a little bit of that this year. I still think they're a good team. And I think Texas last year was a good team. Don't get me wrong. I think there was second best team in the playoffs when after Georgia lost their quarterback and all that. Texas A&M might be that team this year, that they're the best or second best team in the playoffs. But like in Ohio State, like in Indiana, not really tested. And so when they get into the playoffs, it's going to be interesting to see, because now it's even more of a problem because the games are a lot shorter. The one that I always go back to is the 2017 Rose Bowl, where Georgia ended up figuring it out at halftime, figuring out that they needed to run the ball at halftime and beat Oklahoma. But they were shocked for the first half of that game and gave up a ton of points that was uncharacteristic for that Georgia defense. Games are a lot shorter now. So Texas A&M was actually really lucky. They needed everything to go perfectly in the second half for them to come back because of how short the games are and how fewer possessions people get. So if you get in a hole early in some of these playoffs games, you're going to be in trouble. Josh, I want to talk about this. We wouldn't normally talk about a game like this, but it speaks to this a little more. Georgia Tech fans have been absolutely at us on Twitter. I mean, just coming at us because, if you look at the metrics and everything, they were in the top 10, flirting with the top 10 for a while, and we were like, we don't see it. We see an easy schedule. We see, this is before they lost to NC State, right? They lost by double digits to NC State. We're like, you struggled with Duke. You beat Wake Forest by 1 point. You had an ugly win against Temple. You had a 3-point win against Clemson. You have a 7-point win against a 3-win Colorado team. You're barely beating bad teams, and you're not smoking any of them, right? Well, they beat a 1-10 Boston College team by 2 points Saturday, 36-34. And to me, I know winning is everything. Winning, losing, these things matter. In my mind, when you are wanting to be considered for the playoffs, you're complaining that you're underrated at 15. Beating Boston College 36-34 after you just got your hat handed to you against NC State, to me, you should drop, and that should be considered almost as bad as a loss, because there's not a lot of teams that had the luxury of playing as bad as you played to barely beat a 1-10 Boston College team. This is not like, hey, they're sneaky good and they're better than their record. Boston College has been just carpet bombed by almost everybody they played this year. To me, you talk about all the kind of warning signs about Oregon. Georgia Tech, I mean, I guess we have to put them in the playoffs if they win out and win the ACC championship game. But otherwise, they have no business in the playoffs as an at-large team, even if they win out, in my opinion.
Conference's post-expansion is running into the issue where the conference bloat has gotten so much that it's possible to dodge all the other good teams in your conference and have an easy schedule. Georgia Tech is that team this year. We complained about it last year with SMU. At least SMU was smoking a lot of guys, right? But they had an easy schedule. They lost to BYU out of conference, which I felt like really didn't get enough talk. Georgia Tech has a really easy schedule to date. They play Pitt and they play Georgia in the year. I don't know that Pitt is that good. Georgia would be a huge win if they could beat Georgia. Now, I don't think it's a shock. I don't think they're going to beat Georgia. In fact, I know they played them close, but I don't think this year it's even going to be close, frankly. And when I say that, there are teams like 3-loss Tennessee and 2-loss USC that, in my opinion, should be ranked right now ahead of Georgia Tech. They should, in my view. And people are going to be really mad about that. But they should. And I don't really care that they're a 1-loss team. When you look at that schedule and who they've played and how they've won those games, I have really no doubt that Tennessee could have done better with that same schedule. Tennessee's 2 losses are a 6-point loss to Oklahoma, or 3 losses. 6-point loss to Oklahoma, overtime loss to Georgia, 17-point loss to Alabama. Yes, those are the only 3 ranked teams they played. They also played all 3 of those ranked teams very close. They also beat Kentucky by double digits. Arkansas was close. Mississippi State was a close win. Destroyed Syracuse. And that's a Syracuse team. Georgia Tech also
Before
destroyed.
they lost their quarterback.
Yeah, that's true.
Georgia Tech destroyed them without their quarterback.
That's true. Georgia Tech did. Syracuse had pretty much collapsed by that point. Like, I just don't have any indication whatsoever that Georgia Tech would have taken Georgia to overtime, would have played Oklahoma to a touchdown. Like, would they have done better than 17-point loss to Alabama? I don't think so. To the point with USC, I don't think Georgia Tech is beating Illinois. I don't think Georgia Tech is playing on the same field with Notre Dame. I don't think they would beat Michigan 31-13. I don't think they would beat Iowa. They are totally a function of their schedule. And winning matters, losing matters. If you're undefeated, I guess it has to matter at some, but, margin of victory can't control everything. But with so few games and such disparate schedules, you have to take it into account in aggregate. I don't really care in these games if you win by 13 or you win by 30. I don't, Daniel, because you can run up the score. Indiana, God bless them, they run the score up like crazy when they're winning a game. They keep the starters in, and they keep throwing, and they will drive that score high every single time, so they're huge margins. But I do care when you're in one-score wins, because no team tries to win by 7 points. We've talked about this a little bit with Ohio State fans. I am happy to throw out the Week 1 game with Ohio State because a lot of teams look bad in Week 1. It's the first start for Julian Sayin. It is what it is. But don't tell me you dominated that game and slow played it and you intended to win the game 14-7 off 2 drives. There's no planet in which Ryan Day said, yep, I'm happy to be in a game where if Texas ever puts together a single drive or returns a punt, I'm going to lose. That is not a thing. And that's where Georgia Tech is. The AP poll has them 15th, ahead of USC, ahead of Texas, ahead of Michigan, ahead of Virginia, ahead of Tennessee. I don't buy it, Daniel. I mean, even at 9-1, I don't know really why you even have them all that much higher than James Madison, who has a very easy schedule themselves. Certainly easier even than Georgia Tech, but they've also blown out most everybody on that schedule. Again, lost 28-14 to Louisville probably is an indication that schedule parity is still very, very important, and James Madison might make the playoffs with a double-digit loss to the only power team they played. But, that's where we are right now in football. And maybe I'll turn that to you, Daniel. Is there another game you want to talk about, or you want to rant about the reality of the G5 post-expansion?
Well, they're going to get a team in there, and whoever gets that 5th spot, which might be Georgia, by the way, the way the SEC championship game is lining up, and maybe this is an interesting discussion to end this on, because I've been on this sort of soapbox since we've done conference expansion to the gills, and since we've expanded the playoffs to the gills, which they're probably going to do more. These conference championship games are worthless. Ohio State got to sit at home and relax and chill and tune up for their first round game. And I'm not saying that's why they beat Tennessee. Tennessee got to do the same thing. While Penn State and Oregon were battling it out in a knockdown dragout last year, Texas and Georgia were in a knockdown dragout this year. Alabama and Texas A&M are going to be in the SEC championship game because of tiebreakers, and Georgia's going to be sitting at home. Georgia might be the best team in the country right now. Ohio State fans are going to come at me. I don't care. Georgia might be the best team in the country right now. I'm not saying they are, but they might be. And they're going to get a kind of quasi first round bye because they're sitting at home championship weekend. And then they're going to catch James Madison in week 1. And they know who they're going to face in week 2 because they're playing a bye team, right? I'm not sure how the bracket lines up, but I think that's how it works. So they're going to be playing a bye team in week 2. They're going to get to sneak ahead because they're not worried about James Madison. And I just think these championship games are ridiculous. Your reward for being one of the 2 best teams in your brutal conference throughout the year is the 3rd best team gets to sit at home and have an advantage in the playoffs because the loser of the conference championship game might fall behind that 3rd best team or might not, but they have to play this brutal game, maybe get hurt, get banged up, not get that extra week, and then And then what do? They're going to play somebody even harder. So I don't know. Maybe the committee looks at it like, hey, if you lose your conference championship game, if we think the SEC is the best conference and you lose your conference championship game, we don't care what your record is. We're putting you in that fifth spot. That's probably the fair thing to do, but I don't know that that's the logical thing to do. If, let's say, 10-3 Alabama gets a 5 seed over 11-1 Georgia. I don't know if that's fair, but Georgia didn't have to play that game, which also speaks a little bit to Notre Dame. I don't know that Notre Dame should ever get that fifth spot because they're never playing championship weekend.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think, it'll be interesting to see when the playoff rankings also come out in all this. I still think our bracket seeding is going to be a little screwy. I mean, my big soapbox, as you recall, was always saying that requiring the conference champions to be the first 4 teams was very likely going to totally screw up the bracket, which it did. It still irks me that I could predict that for like 3 years, and in my view, it was blatantly obvious, and then people running this multi-billion-dollar enterprise couldn't see that coming, and it destroyed their ratings. But, whatever. I think there could be some weird realities, too, that you have, let's say, Alabama and Texas A&M are, the SEC champions. So let's say Alabama beats Texas A&M, who's undefeated. Does that put Alabama, where does that put them relative to Georgia and the rest of the playoff slots? Like, how much is the committee going to weight the fact that they're now the conference champion over Georgia? Do they now jump back over Georgia? And if they do, are you going to end up in that weird situation where, A&M or Georgia ends up being the 5 seed? And the 5 seed in the current playoff, in my view, is broken because the 12th seed is going to be a G5 team that is grossly inferior to everybody else in this bracket. And then you play the 4 seed, and then theoretically you play the 1 seed, but you play the 1 seed in the semifinal. And if you look at any of the other brackets, you're probably going to have a much tougher draw. The 11 and the 12 is the big trick, is they're probably going to be inferior. So being 5 or 6, and being 6, you're going to play probably, maybe the ACC champion, who's probably going to be a serious cut below a lot of the other teams in this bracket. And then you're going to go face the number 3 seed. I do think the team, I don't know about you, Daniel, the team that I would want no part of right now, and I don't know how good they are, and we can't ever get to talk about them because of schedule. I don't want anything to do with Texas Tech. If I'm one of the major champions, because I feel like Texas Tech's either going to win the playoff or they're going to lose in spectacular fashion, but I do not want to be the team to find out which one it is.
Yeah, I think that, we've noted all year their one loss was without their quarterback, but it's also a situation where they're not beating anybody. They're beating a lot of teams they're beating some good teams with clean records who also haven't beaten anybody. It is such a circular thing, but none of that means they're not the best team in the country. So that's hard to follow up. All right, we got to go. This is a long one. A lot of fun, y'all. Thanks. I think that this has been sort of our love song to college football this year, our love letter maybe, because we don't sing, and I've really enjoyed it, and we're going to keep doing them. I like it more than the previews, if I'm being totally honest. So thank you all for hanging on this long, and we will see you in the next one. Check out our one. I think we're going to drop one preview later this week for the only game that we really want to talk about this week. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.